All right, good morning, everybody. Today is Thursday, July 25th, 2019. It is our weekly team meeting, and today we're going to be talking about CMAs, slippers, and net sheets, or as they're more commonly referred to as comparative market analysis, your suggested listing price report, and your net sheet. Now, we did a video like this a couple years ago, but we have since made some updates, and so now this video is going to go over the new updates that we have. This video is also part of the Summer Learning Sessions. So if you're not part of the Home Homes team, we appreciate you watching this and enjoying some of the programming that we have. But today, what our goal is for our presentation is to essentially find the value of a property. And whether we are working with the seller or whether we're working with a buyer to buy a particular property, understanding the value of the property is pretty important. We can come up with a price that the seller wants, we can come up with a price that a buyer wants, but the market is really what's going to dictate what is the appropriate final closing price of that particular home. Our job is to provide as much information to the buyer and the seller as possible so they can ultimately make the best decision as to what is the appropriate value of their property. So for us, how we're going to dive into it and go over a specific example using a specific property. And for this example, we are going to assume that we are the listing agent giving a listing presentation. And during a listing presentation, the seller is going to want to know a couple things. They're going to want to know, how much they think their home is worth, how much money is it going to cost to sell their home, and then how much money are they going to make at the end of the day. And so using our two sheets here, the suggested listing price report sheet, or the SLPR report, and then the net sheet here as well, these two sheets are going to help us determine what the appropriate value of a property is, as well as how much money the seller can anticipate making once they sell their particular property. You can use this same scenario as if you were a buyer looking to purchase this property. So let's assume that this property is currently on the market, and you wanted to know, hey, the price that the listing agent has set for this property, is this the appropriate price? And even if it is the appropriate price, if we were to offer something a little bit lower, would the seller accept something like that? So again, it's important to do this not only as a seller when you're doing a listing, or working with a seller when you're doing a listing presentation, but it's equally as important to do it when you're representing a buyer, because that way now we can understand what the seller's selling position is, we can understand a better market position of this particular property, and we get an overall better sense of just the general value of the property. And really, as real estate agents, this is one of the most important tools that we can do, one of the most important services that we can provide for our clients. And so having a good understanding of pulling a CMA, running a SLPR and a net sheet is really, really important. So with that, we'll go ahead and get started. So the first thing that we need to do is identify a sample property. So in this particular instance, we've identified a sample property. Here's the sample property. Here's a couple pictures of what it looks like. It is a little bit bigger than your average suburban home, and it is sold a couple years ago. Looks pretty standard. It's in a cookie cutter neighborhood. So for the most part, the process should be pretty straightforward in identifying some value. We'll talk a little bit about when you have a little bit more unique property, when you're not able to really find some comps, what are some ways that we can go about valuing the property. So let's go back a little bit and then understand, okay, before the age of the internet and before the age of the automated valuation, how did real estate agents come to find the value of a property? Well, the best way to do it was to pull the comparable properties, both sold, pending, and active properties, to get a good sense of what the property is worth. The idea is that if you have a subject property and find other properties that are similar, you can use the replacement valuation model to say, okay, this one is approximately a little bit bigger, a little bit smaller, has fewer bedrooms, and it's sold for this. Therefore, we make some adjustments, and our property value will be this. And we pull that information too. So in our SLPR, our suggested listing price report, we pull our own CMA. Pull some sold properties that are similar, pull some active properties that are similar. And in the past, those were the only bits of data that we gave to our clients for them to understand what the value of the property is. Today, obviously with the internet and automated valuations, there's a whole lot more information out there to clients to be able to find the value of the property. And to what I say to that is, let's use it. The more information, the more data we have, the better. Now, what our job is to be able to separate the signal from the noise and to understand, okay, yes, there's a lot of them out there. Let's not just use one of them, and pick and choose which one. Let's use a lot of them, aggregate that data, and then based on that information, then we can get an appropriate range and really come to what we think is going to be a very good estimate of actual price. So it's not to say that our CMA is correct and the only data out there, and it's not to say that the Zillow's estimate and the Realtor.com estimate is the only data and information out there. No, it's just there are multiple data points that we incorporate into our pricing strategy. And so that's what we're looking to do. And because most of these tools are public and available to the general public, they know this information too. So why try to hide it? Why try to fight it when they're getting better? These automated online valuations, they're getting more useful and they're getting more relevant. Incorporate that into your reports. Don't just incorporate one, though. Again, we want to incorporate a lot of different data points. And these two spreadsheets here, the suggested listing price report and the net sheet, really get a good understanding of exactly, okay, we're going to pull different scenarios, give our clients different options to be able to understand what's going to work. So with that, let's dive into this particular example and figure out what we need. So for our example, you'll see the first line here, the listing price. For now, we're going to leave that blank. Because the listing price here, that's something that we're going to determine manually based on some of our statistics and review of the property. And this information here, we're going to enter, it's going to automatically be entered into our net sheet. So for now, we're going to leave the listing line blank. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to just find these different sources of online valuations and pull what that data is. So the first one is Realtor Property Resource. You'll find that this link or this text is hyperlinked. So you just click the link here, it'll open it up. We enter our property and find out, okay, according to RPR, Realtor Property Resource, they think that the value of this property is this. So we're going to enter that number into our spreadsheet. 4,690. And there, now we have one estimate. Now again, if we were only using RPR, we would only get one number for our valuation. Now it could be high, it could be low, it could be spot on. We won't know that until we get some more numbers to be able to back up that data. And that's why we use the several different sources. So again, we'll go to Realtor.com, click on that link, opens up our tab here. We find that according to Realtor.com, the price, their estimated value is this. So we're going to enter that into our, we get a good understanding. Okay, seems like the low 400 range, that seems to be an appropriate range at this point. But again, that's just 2 data points. We need a whole lot more than just 2 data points to get that information ready to go. So now we can pull our county property appraiser report. So in your software tools in the MLS, you have both Realist and IMAP, and then to some extent Remine as well, that pull property data from the county property appraiser. But for our purposes here, we're going to go into Realist and we're going to pull the specific report from Realist and find out if we can get some information about this property. So in 2018, Hillsborough County Property Tax Appraiser said that the value of this property was $289. And so from our purposes, 696. So I'm going to show you what I'm going to do here. 289, 696 divided by 0.8. So I've entered this property valuation here according to the property tax appraiser. Because what they do is obviously some homes are homesteaded, and so some of the taxable value is taken off of that property. But also to help with market fluctuations, the property appraiser automatically takes some value off their estimates from their market value. So that way prices won't fluctuate drastically from a taxation perspective year over year. They can get a better, more regular sense of what their income is going to be from a property tax perspective. But from our perspective, determining market value, we have to add that value back into that equation. And so what we'll do, typically it's about 20% they take off, so we need to add that information back into the estimate. So for our circumstance, we divide by 80% to get us a valuation of that. That's one way we can use the property appraiser's report. Again, we're pulling another one, so the Zillow's estimate, we pull that one here as well. And they say 394, 699. So we'll pull that here, 394, 699. So again, what we find that, this one number here, if we just were to give that one number, that wouldn't tell the whole story. Now we start to see a potential range here. And if high 300s, low 400s, now that seems to be a much more appropriate range. the more data we pull, the better that we can get an understanding of what the appropriate price point is. So again, we're pulling some information here, open up this link here, and we get this particular number here for our estimates. So we're going to enter that here. CoreLogic is another source of information that we can pull. We can find that information in our realist reports here. The CoreLogic real AVM here, 16,500. So we're going to enter that information, 16,500. And then Remine is a software, big data software through our MLS that we can access that information to. And pulling up this link in Remine, it's going to open up our valuation card for this property. And according to them, we scroll down here, get some automated valuations here. This becomes their estimate for this property. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take these out of the equation here. And so now we get a good understanding. Okay, so now we have, if we were just to use these online valuations here, we could say with almost 100% confidence that if we were the listing agent and wanted to put the home on the market today, I would feel 100% comfortable putting it at a low of 362 and a high of 416, knowing that based on some of the online automated valuation models out there, these is the appropriate range that they're giving me. Now, if I'm going to pull, just in the median right there, I get a good understanding of what that median price point is. Close to list ratio, we're going to find that information out shortly when we pull our comps. And then we're going to use that information to enter into our net sheet. So let's say, for example, if we wanted to use 389. So if we put 389 as our listing price here, that's going to enter automatically into our net sheet and pull some numbers based on that information that we just entered here. But for now, we're going to leave this blank until we pull some comps. So that's pretty quick and easy. When we need to find approximate valuation of a property, we just use some online valuation, automated valuation tools to pull this information. Now, what's great is because we use Google Sheets, you can use this on your phone. So if you're at a particular house and someone wants you to pull a quick slipper report, we can do it on our phones pretty quickly. A lot of these websites have mobile-friendly websites or apps that we can pull that data from as well. So now what we're going to do, we're going to pull some comps. So this is more the traditional way of finding the value of the property. Again, it's neither right nor wrong compared to the automated valuation. It is just a way to pull more information and something that we should do. So with that, we want to get some comps, some information about this particular property. So we know it is in this particular zip code, and it's a 5-bedroom, 4.5 bath, a little over 3,000 square feet, and it's got a 3-car garage. So those are some of the basic facts about this particular property. We also want to see, okay, it has a pool as well. Some bigger facts about a property that are a little bit more difficult to change, those are some things that we want to keep track of. But it's also nearly a 1/4 acre property as well. So let's start to pull some of those comps. So if we know that we have a home, we want to search active and sold properties. We'll start within the last year and we'll narrow it down if we have to. So in the entire zip code of non-short sale and foreclosed single family residence with at least 5 bedrooms, we have 71 examples to pull from. And so if we did more than 4, it's not new construction, it has a private pool, it has a garage, and heated square feet, we'll call 2,500 to 4,000. So now we can get a much more narrow range of that. So now we, instead of going from 71 properties, we now have 12 properties to be able to pull from. And really a year ago is a long time. If ideally we can get 3 months and we can get some sample properties, that would be great. Typically what we're looking for is anywhere between 5 to 10 properties is usually a good estimate to get for our comps. And so what we'd have to do is if we don't quite get 5, we need to either expand our geographic area or expand our time horizon. So instead of going 3 months, let's go back 6 months. So now we have 6 results. So that is a pretty good estimate. So now based on some basic facts of this property, the zip code, housing type, specific characteristics of the property, we can get some pretty quick results of what some comps are for this particular property. Knowing that information, we can pull some stats on this. So we have 6 properties, 1 active and 5 solds. Solds here are going to be pretty helpful for us. The actives, we might reevaluate our search criteria to get some more actives. But sold, that's pretty impressive. We can get 5 comps with similar statistics. We're pretty happy with that information here. And really what we're looking for is the average and median price point, as well as the sales price to list price ratio, or the close to list ratio here. And what we're getting is about 99, 98%. So for that information here, we entered 98.5% close to list ratio, which essentially means that the price that a home is listed at, it goes for 1 to 2% discount for an actual closing price. So that means for this particular property in this particular area, the sellers have a lot of negotiation power. Buyers don't. They get 1, maybe a 2% discount on what the listing price is. Other homes, if we find, maybe something's got on the low end at 96, that's still within 4% of the actual listing price. That's still some pretty good buying power for the seller. If we're getting 95 or less, and certainly 90 and in the 80s, the buyer can receive 10, 20% discount on properties, and that's pretty big. But that's important for us to know if we're listing agents, certainly to say this home in this particular neighborhood, the sellers have a really good opportunity to get what they're asking for. But from that information too, we're looking at some closed price points here. We see of these 5 properties, we have an average close price of $438. So that's what we're going to be using here. So of these 5 sold properties that are similar that we pulled in our comps, we have 438, 380. So we have 5 sold comps, 338, 380. And what you'll notice too is that I did not specifically look at the sold properties whatsoever. I'm basing on the stats that we pulled. As far as size, square footage, location, characteristics, just simple details that we can pull, these are similar. If I wanted to dig even a little further, let's say we get something in the 100s and something in the 800s, then I might want to do some examination to see, okay, are these properties similar? But taking a look at these, looking at the front end of these properties, I can see, okay, they're all very similar in style and location to our subject property. Therefore, they're probably pretty good comps. Again, since we didn't have very many actives, what I might do is try to find some more actives that could potentially work for us. So I might reduce the number of bedrooms here and maybe up the garage spaces here so we can get something a little bit more specific with that. So now with my active properties, okay, now my active range gets a little bit wider. And understanding that, okay, now, although these aren't quite exact, they're pretty close to what I'm looking for. So if I get my 5 actives here, average price point of $438. So again, I got my average here. What was that number? 438, 700. Okay, great. So now I have a much better understanding of this property as far as what a potential market price is going to be for this particular property here. So from that perspective, what I can determine is that what is my possible low, which we have, and possible high, and then based on that, what's my median price within that range. So again, I can now go to the seller and say, okay, seller, I am 100% confident that based on all the market data that we pulled, I'm 100% comfortable in putting the home on the market at a low price of $362 and a high price of $438, with the median price being $400. Now that's the suggested listing price. The estimated closing price is going to depend quite a bit on the close to list ratio, but also some other negotiating factors. So even if I was to put this home on the market for $400, based on our 1.5% discount rate, we can expect a closing price for a seller around $394. So now knowing that information here, what's most important now is I have to provide that one number that I think which would be appropriate to list the property at. So let's say we use 400. I can reasonably justify that I have enough data to show that my property is worth that, and it might even be worth a little bit more. So we might even say 410. Because some of the things that we want to do is say, okay, is it in line with some of the sold properties? But more importantly, is it in line with some of the active properties? If the seller needs to move quickly, we might price it a little bit lower than some of the other active properties here. And knowing that our property, these 4 bedrooms are in the low 400s, and these 5 bedrooms are in the middle 400s, we might even go up to 425 for our example here. Again, still 100% comfortable in that price point, in that price range to be able to list that property. Where we might start to get antsy is, let's say a seller wants us to list the price at $450,000. Well, now for our example, now our listing price becomes the high price. We don't have any information to justify that particular price other than maybe one comp. And again, we don't want to use just one data point. We want to use several different data points here. So for me, I am most comfortable, 1 extra 0, putting the property price at that. So now that I've entered my listing price here, that information automatically carries over to my net sheet. So again, I have my listing price here, and then based on different discounts throughout the price range spectrum here, we can get to different potential closing prices, anywhere from 400 in scenario A all the way up to our listing price in scenario E. Our net sheet here now has different information about the expected closing costs associated for a particular seller here. And some things are set in stone, some things can certainly be negotiated. Title insurance, doc stamps, that is set in stone by regulation. So these numbers do not change. They fluctuate based on the closing price of the home. Obviously, commission is a negotiated amount. So if we wanted to have 10% charge, if we wanted to only have 4% charge, we can play with that information and adjust it accordingly. For record-keeping purposes, the average commission for 2018 in Hillsborough County was this. And so we're using averages here, we can get a better understanding. Third-party closing fees, again, this is something that can be adjusted and negotiated, but we always want to estimate on the high side, so that way our seller actually ends up getting more money at the closing table than we projected. Estoppel and other mortgage fees, so if a home is in a HOA, homeowners association and condo association, there will be some estoppel fees. The maximum that we can charge, or the maximum that can be charged to a seller, is $250. Other fees as well, more for if they're doing our ready offers program. And again, if the seller is willing to give any discounts to a particular buyer, we would have to include that. So if it's 1% of the closing price, 2% of the closing price, or if it's 0.5% of the closing price, that information we would need to pull here. But again, that's optional based on some negotiations. So now we have an understanding. Okay, so let's say that scenario D is what ends up happening, that we listed the home at 425, and we go under contract for 418,625. Based on that information here, based on our closing costs, these are the total costs to the seller to close their home. Therefore, their gross that they would receive would be this particular number. Now, that's not quite their net. And again, we're looking for the net. That's why we call it the net sheet after all. So this is our gross. What we need to figure out then is, after that, is what is their remaining mortgage balance. And now, obviously, this information we will not be able to pull completely unless we get that information specifically from the seller. But we can get pretty close to examining how much the seller has remaining on their mortgage. And to do that, we'll do a couple things. So first, we need the realist report, because that's going to give us some very specific information about the sales history and the mortgage history. So we know that this particular buyer bought the home in October of 2015. And in October of 2015, they also took out a mortgage on the property. So based on this information that we have here, we know that 322 was the purchase price, 257.6. So 322 was the purchase price minus
257,600.
For my down payment amount, I'm taking the purchase price minus the mortgage amount, an extra 0 here. And so I know my down payment amount for this home was $64,400. And I'm copying that over to the rest of the down payment amounts. Now I need to figure out the remaining mortgage balance on the home. So I know that originally in 2015, a 30-year, more than likely fixed rate mortgage was taken out in this home for this particular amount. So $257,600.
Mhm.
So again, going into my net sheet here, clicking on this link here, it opens up a hyperlink for us to be able to figure out find an amortization table to find out exactly how much that person owes on their mortgage. So I know their loan amount was $257,600. I know that they took out a 30-year mortgage. What I don't know is their interest rate. Now, we can estimate based on a couple different factors, based on when, and the biggest factor is when the mortgage was taken out. So we also, in our drive, we have historical averages that go month by month over the past 5-6 years to say, okay, in October 2015, what was the average mortgage rate for residential properties? And we can estimate safely it was around 4%. So again, we won't know this information. It's pretty crucial information because if we had a 6% mortgage, then our mortgage payments jump up $300, and we would have a different remaining balance. But let's say we know that it's approximately 4%. So here it gives us an annual and a monthly amortization schedule. And so what we need to figure out is, okay, in October 2015, they took out a balance of this. Today is July 2019. What is the remaining balance on that mortgage? Because to find out how much they're going to net, we know our total costs of closing, we need to figure out the remaining balance on the mortgage, and that's going to give us our net proceeds to the particular seller. So again, this was approximately 40 months ago, and so 40 months into the mortgage, we know that the remaining balance on the property is going to be about $242,169. So if we know that 242,169. We enter that information across the board. So again, if we're looking at scenario D here, we know we listed at 425, we're under contract at 418, we know these are our expected costs. And we know that this is what the seller, after they cost, this is what they're going to gross. We know that their remaining mortgage balance is approximately this. Again, it's not 100% accurate. It's approximately that information, but it's pretty close. And assuming that approximation is correct, we know that at the closing table, if we were to close today on this particular property at this particular price point, we know that the seller would receive a check at the closing table for approximately that much money. And we can even go a step further, and based on the amount of down payment, that from an investment perspective, they more than doubled their investment. They made 126% return on their investment over the past 4 years. Not too bad. So again, when we're looking at this particular property, now we know a lot of information about this property to be able to present to a particular seller or even a buyer to understand what is the appropriate market price of this home. So we understand, okay, there are several online automated valuations out there that can help us determine the price of the home. There are ways that using the MLS, we can pull some comps, pulling some sold properties and pulling some active properties to best understand what is the appropriate price of that home. Understanding now we have an expected low range and expected high range, we can get somewhere in the middle there to make an appropriate judgment. Now, maybe when we're at the home, we understand that it has a terrible layout, it's messy, the fixtures are all dated, the roof is aging, it needs a new AC, then we might price it on the lower end of the spectrum. But if we're touring the home physically and we understand that it's got the nicest upgrades imaginable, it's kept well, new appliances, new fixtures, we might price it closer a little bit to the high range as well. So again, all this information is only based on the things that we can pull online. We still should do a physical examination of the property to get a better understanding of where in this range the property value is going to lie. But again, once we get a good range, we can have that information plugged into our net sheet. And then again, the most important information that the seller is going to want to know is how much money am I going to make at the end of the day? These particular lines here are going to tell us exactly how much the seller is going to make should they close on their home today. And with that, those are the most important information when filling out a CMA, comparative market analysis, a SLPR report, a suggested listing price, as well as the net sheet. Again, this information is all in your drive. You can access it whenever you want to, make a copy of this particular spreadsheet, put it in your own drive, and then play with these numbers for every property that you do. And so with that, we appreciate you watching the first class about the updated SLPR report and the net sheet. Thanks for watching the Summer of Learning sessions, and we look forward to seeing you next week. Thanks again, everybody. Bye-bye.